be a fool, son. Put those away.
Turn. Around. Now.
The heat was a living entity. It had weight and texture, pressing in on Battalion Chief Marcus Thorne. A physical assault that defied the crisp October air. It was a dry, biblical heat that baked the asphalt, warped the vinyl siding on the houses across the street, and made the very air shimmer. It radiated from the skeletal remains of the O'Malley textile warehouse in a furious, invisible wave. Flames. A roiling conflagration of incandescent orange and a deep, greedy crimson roared from the collapsed roof, punching a column of greasy black smoke into the afternoon sky, a funeral pyre for a century of local industry. For Thorne, this was the dragon. Every big fire was. A mythical beast of heat and fury that had to be understood before it could be slain. You didn't just fight it, you diagnosed it, anticipated its moves, and respected its power. At 45, Thorne had faced down more of these beasts than he could count. He was a man carved from the rigors of his profession, solid and immovable, his face, framed by the soot-stained brim of his white chief's helmet, was a roadmap of experience, each line earned in the crucible of 1,000 emergencies. His voice, a calm and resonant baritone, was the steady hand on the tiller in the midst of the storm. "Engine 15, maintain your water curtain on the Bravo exposure," he commanded into his radio, his gaze never leaving the tilting west wall of the warehouse. "We let that lumber yard catch, and we lose the whole block." His crews from the 4th Battalion moved with the brutal, efficient grace of men who shared an unspoken language forged in fire. They were a blur of yellow turnout gear against the gray backdrop of smoke and concrete. Two-man teams wrestled with thick, pressurized hose lines that seemed to have a life of their own, bucking and straining like angry pythons. On the far side, the Charlie side, the crew of Ladder 9 was setting up for a defensive master stream attack, a last-ditch effort to drown the beast in thousands of gallons of water per minute. Every action was a calculated move in a violent, high-stakes chess match. Thorne was playing against the physics of combustion. The initial call had been for a dumpster fire, a routine trash out. But upon arrival, the first-in engine company had found the fire had already breached the building through a ventilation shaft, feasting on decades of stored fabrics, chemicals, and dry wooden beams. It was a ventilation-controlled fire that had found its banquet. Now, the priority was simple and brutal. Containment. The building was a total loss. His job was to ensure it was the only loss. The two exposures, a family-owned lumber yard to the west and a row of small businesses to the east, were the pawns he had to protect at all costs. "Chief!" a voice cut through the cacophony. It was Captain Miller, his second-in-command, jogging toward him, his face a mask of grime and sweat. "West wall is starting to buckle. That parapet is going to come down any minute. I'm pulling our crews back another 50 feet to the collapse zone." "Good call, Dave," Thorne affirmed, keying his radio again. "All companies, be advised. We have an imminent collapse hazard on the Bravo side. All personnel maintain your distance outside the established collapse zone. Command acknowledges." He trusted Miller implicitly. Miller saw the fire the same way he did, as a series of problems to be solved, not a chaos to be feared. He scanned the perimeter, his eyes taking in every detail. The police had established a control line a block away, keeping the inevitable crowd of onlookers at a safe distance. An ambulance crew stood by, a quiet promise of aid should the worst happen. The scene, for all its inherent chaos, was a structured, controlled environment. Every person there had a role, a purpose, a place in the hierarchy of the emergency. It was a system built on decades of trial and error, of lessons learned in tragedy and triumph. It was a system designed to impose order on the most disorderly of events. Thorne stood at the apex of that system, the incident commander. The responsibility was a physical weight on his shoulders, familiar and heavy. It was a weight he had trained his entire life to bear. He turned his attention back to the buckling wall, watching the mortar between the old bricks turn to dust under the relentless thermal assault. He was so focused on the dragon in front of him that he didn't immediately notice the new, and far more unpredictable, threat approaching from behind. Officer Kyler Vance of the Oakwood Police Department saw the world in clean, unambiguous lines. There was the law, and there were those who broke it. There was order, and there was the chaos that threatened it. His job, as he saw it, was to be the sharpened edge of that order, the unyielding barrier against the chaos. At 28, he was a 5-year veteran, but he carried himself with the unshakable certitude of a man twice his age. He was fit, with a military-style haircut that was as severe as his world view, and a jaw that seemed perpetually set in a state of grim determination. He hadn't joined the force out of a sense of community service. He joined for the clarity. In a confusing world, the penal code was a book of answers. He'd been the 3rd patrol unit to arrive, and from the moment he stepped out of his car, his mind began working a different puzzle than the one consuming Marcus Thorne. While the firefighter saw a tactical problem of heat and BTUS, Vance saw a potential crime scene, a dumpster fire that just happened to leap into an old, failing business. To him, that wasn't a coincidence. It was a narrative. He could already feel the shape of it: arson for insurance fraud. The case file was already open in his head. His ambition was a quiet, burning engine inside him. He'd already taken the exam for the Detectives Bureau and was awaiting the results. He listened to true crime podcasts on his commute, analyzing the investigators' methods, critiquing their missteps. He saw himself not as a beat cop, but as an investigator in waiting, a guardian of evidence. This belief in his own deductive prowess often ran far ahead of his actual experience. His personnel file was a testament to this. It contained several commendations for proactive arrests, but it was also flagged with a handful of citizen complaints alleging an overly aggressive demeanor during traffic stops, what his sergeant called a lack of verbal judo. He saw no need for judo when a direct command would suffice. Authority, to Vance, was not something to be negotiated. It was something to be asserted. He strode toward the command post, a white battalion chief's SUV, his posture rigid with purpose. He passed firefighters pulling hose, giving them only a cursory glance. They were tools, instruments of suppression, necessary, but secondary to what he considered the primary mission, preserving the integrity of his investigation. In his mind, every gallon of water they poured onto the blaze was another clue being washed away, another piece of his case being irrevocably contaminated. He found the man with the white helmet standing near the SUV's tailgate, staring intently at the burning building. Vance didn't see a commander managing a complex emergency. He saw an obstacle, an old-timer, probably set in his ways, ignorant of the delicate procedural dance of a criminal investigation. "Chief," Vance said, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise. He didn't wait for an acknowledgement. "I'm Officer Vance. I'm the primary officer on scene. I need an update. Has anyone made entry?" Thorne turned, his focus shifting from the collapsing wall to the young officer. He offered a curt nod. "Battalion Chief Thorne, no. We haven't made entry. The structure is fully involved and unstable. We're in a defensive posture." "Defensive," Vance repeated, a note of disapproval in his tone. "I need this scene preserved. Where is the point of origin?" "The initial report was a dumpster on the Charlie Delta corner," Thorne said, his attention already drifting back to the fire. "But as you can see, it's a little academic at this point." The dismissal, however slight, grated on Vance. This chief wasn't taking him seriously. He wasn't grasping the gravity of the situation, the legal gravity. "I'm going to need you to keep your people out of the southwest corner when you do go in," Vance stated. Not as a request, but as a directive. "The business owner's office is there. That will be the financial nexus of my arson investigation." Thorne turned fully to face him now, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He took in the officer's rigid stance, his clenched jaw. He'd seen this type before. Young cops, full of academy theory and a desperate need to prove themselves. They saw everything as a nail because the only tool they trusted was their hammer. "Son," Thorne said, his voice patient but firm, "right now, my only nexus is keeping that lumber yard from turning into a second inferno. There won't be an office to investigate if I lose this flank. My men will go where I tell them to go to suppress this fire. Your arson investigator can have whatever's left when we're done." This fundamental disconnect was the fault line. Thorne saw a dynamic, life-threatening emergency that had to be stabilized. Vance saw a static crime scene that had to be frozen. Thorne's authority was derived from the immediate, tangible threat of the flames. Vance's was derived from the abstract, procedural demands of the law. On that smoky stretch of Elm Street, these two incompatible realities were on a collision course. A deep, guttural groan echoed from the warehouse as a 20-foot section of the roof gave way, plunging into the heart of the inferno. A geyser of embers, like a swarm of angry fireflies, spiraled into the sky, carried on the thermal column. The firefighters on the perimeter instinctively flinched, their training holding them in place just outside the danger zone. The dragon was thrashing, growing weaker but more unpredictable in its death throes. "We're holding them, Chief!" Captain Miller's voice crackled over the radio. "The water curtain is working, the lumberyard wall is getting steamed, but it's not catching." "Copy that. Dave, keep me posted," Thorne replied, his focus absolute. The partial roof collapse was a good sign. It vented the fire, releasing the pent-up heat and energy, which would lessen the stress on the remaining walls. It was a small victory in a long, grueling battle. He turned back to find Officer Vance still standing there, unmoved, his expression a mask of stony disapproval. The officer had clearly not registered the tactical significance of the collapse. He was still locked onto his own internal script. "My investigation," Vance said, his voice tight with frustration, "is not an afterthought, Chief. It is a parallel priority. You are legally required to take reasonable steps to preserve evidence of a crime." Thorne let out a short, humorless breath. The sheer audacity of the lecture was galling. He felt the familiar slow burn of irritation, but he kept his voice level. Decades on the job had taught him that losing his temper on a fireground was a luxury he could never afford. "Officer, with all due respect, you're not listening. There is one priority on this scene right now, and it is life safety. That includes the lives of my firefighters and the public. That lumberyard is full of flammable adhesives, lacquers, and about 1 million board feet of dry timber. If this fire jumps the alley, we're not talking about a crime scene anymore. We're talking about a multi-block catastrophe and a citywide evacuation. That is the only reality that matters right now." He pointed a gloved finger toward the yellow police tape a block away. "Your scene is behind that line. This," he said, making a sweeping gesture that encompassed the burning building, his engines, and his men, "is my fireground. By state law and municipal code, I am the supreme authority within these boundaries until the incident is stabilized. My authority is not parallel to yours. It supersedes it." For Vance, this was an intolerable challenge. Supersedes? Nothing superseded the law. He saw Thorne's calm explanation not as professional guidance, but as an arrogant dismissal of his role. He was being treated like a glorified traffic cop, a security guard for the real work being done. The ambition inside him curdled into resentment. He was being stonewalled, obstructed by a man who couldn't see the bigger picture. That law is meant to prevent civilians from interfering, Vance countered, his legal knowledge feeling thin but his conviction holding firm. It is not a shield to hide behind while you actively destroy evidence of a Class A felony. Destroying evidence? Thorne's voice finally lost its patient edge, replaced by a note of cold steel. Tell me something, officer. Do you know what the auto-ignition temperature of pine is? Do you know what a flashover is? Do you understand the mechanics of a backdraft? Because my men and I live and breathe that science every single day. We are not destroying evidence. We are fighting a chemical reaction that is threatening to burn this neighborhood to the ground. Your evidence, my evidence, it's all just fuel to this fire. Now, I have a job to do. I suggest you go and do yours. Thorne turned his back on the officer, a clear and final dismissal. He keyed his radio. Command to Ladder 9. What's your ETA on getting the master stream operational? The gesture was a profound insult to Vance. He had been lectured, condescended to, and then turned away from as if he were an irrelevance. The yellow tape Thorne had pointed to suddenly seemed like a symbolic barrier, a line drawn not just on the street, but between their two worlds. Thorne had placed him on the outside, a spectator, in that moment. Vance's mission shifted. It was no longer just about preserving a potential crime scene. It was about reasserting his authority over the man who had just so flagrantly dismissed it. He took a step forward, crossing an invisible line of his own, from professional disagreement into open confrontation. Just as Ladder 9's captain responded. A sharp, percussive boom erupted from the warehouse's second floor. A pocket of unburned gases, superheated to over 1,000 degrees, had finally found an oxygen source and ignited. The pressure wave was a physical blow, a violent shove from an invisible hand. It blew out a row of dusty windows, sending a shower of shattered glass cascading onto the street below. Thorne didn't even flinch, his mind instantly processing the event. It was a smoke explosion, a dangerous but expected event in a fire of this magnitude. All companies, sound off. Report your status, he barked into the radio. A quick, efficient roll call to ensure none of his crews had been caught in the blast. One by one, they checked in, their voices slightly breathless but confirming they were okay. The blast, however, seemed to have a different effect on Officer Vance. It didn't intimidate him. It galvanized him. In the violent explosion, he saw not a random act of physics, but a confirmation of his theory. It was an accelerant. He thought, it had to be. His suspicion hardened into certainty. Did you hear that? Vance said, his voice laced with a prosecutorial zeal. That was no wood fire. That was a chemical accelerant, probably gasoline. Thorne shot him a look of pure exasperation. It was a smoke explosion. It's a textbook event in a contents-heavy commercial structure. It's what happens when you have a high heat, low oxygen environment. It has nothing to do with gasoline. That's your opinion, Vance retorted, his tone dripping with condescension. My job is to deal in facts and evidence, and you are actively working to obliterate that evidence. I've made contact with a witness. He bluffed, inventing a source to bolster his position. He saw two men leaving the back of the building in a hurry just before the first alarm. This is now a high-probability felony arson. I am officially declaring this entire area a crime scene. The declaration was absurd, a meaningless gesture. The area was already an emergency zone under Thorne's command, but for Vance, the words were a shield. They were an invocation of a higher authority, one he believed Thorne could not legally ignore. You can declare anything you want, officer, Thorne said, his patience worn to a thread. It doesn't change my responsibilities, and it doesn't change the fact that the west wall is about to come down. As if on cue, a long vertical crack zippered through the brick facade of the Bravo wall. It widened with an audible groan, shedding a small avalanche of brick and mortar. The top of the wall began to lean outward, a slow, inexorable bow to gravity and fire. "Command to all units! The Bravo wall is failing!" Thorne's voice boomed over the radio, a sharp, urgent command that cut through all other noise. "We're going fully defensive on that side. Engine 15, abandon the hand line. Back out. Ladder 9, I want that master stream directed at the base of the Bravo wall. I want to cool it and try to control the collapse. Do it now." The calculus of the fireground had shifted in an instant. The imminent collapse posed a direct threat to the firefighters themselves. The house was already gone. Protecting his people was now the paramount concern. As his crews scrambled to reposition, abandoning their posts near the wall of death, Vance saw his window of opportunity, his chance to preserve his pristine crime scene, slamming shut. The master stream, a cannon of water, would obliterate everything. "No!" Vance's voice was sharp, almost a shriek. "I forbid it! Do not put water on that wall!" The order was so ludicrous, so breathtakingly incompetent, that for a moment, Thorne could only stare at him. He thought he must have misheard. "You forbid it?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "That's right," Vance said, stepping directly in front of Thorne, blocking his view of the fire. His hand dropped to his side, resting near the grip of his service pistol, a subtle, menacing gesture of authority. "I am giving you a lawful order as a peace officer. The point of origin is likely at the base of that wall, near where the initial dumpster fire was. You will destroy any potential pore patterns. You will not drown my evidence." It was the moment the situation tipped from a frustrating argument into a truly dangerous confrontation. The young officer, blinded by a toxic combination of ambition and ignorance, was trying to assert tactical command of a fire. He was issuing orders that would not only fail to preserve evidence, but would exponentially increase the danger to everyone on the scene. The unburned sections of the wall were groaning under the thermal stress. A controlled collapse was one thing. An uncontrolled, explosive one was a killer. Cooling the base was their only chance to prevent a catastrophic failure. Vance's order wasn't just wrong, it was potentially lethal. And in that surreal moment, under the pillar of black smoke, with the groaning of stressed steel in the air, Marcus Thorne realized the most dangerous thing on his fireground wasn't the dragon. It was the zealot with a badge standing in front of him. The world seemed to slow to a crawl. The roar of the fire, the thrum of the engine pumps, the shouts of his men. It all faded into a dull, distant hum in Marcus Thorne's ears. The only thing in focus was the unwavering, fanatical conviction in Officer Vance's eyes. The young man genuinely believed he was in the right, that his abstract need for evidence was more important than the immediate physical reality of the collapsing wall. Thorne had spent a career making split-second decisions with life-and-death consequences. He weighed risk versus reward, calculated structural loads, and read the subtle language of smoke and flame. Every instinct, every ounce of his 25 years of training screamed at him that obeying Vance's order would be a catastrophic dereliction of his most sacred duty, to protect his people. It wasn't a lawful order. A lawful order must, by definition, be legal and safe. This was neither. It was an invitation to disaster. He met the officer's glare, his own eyes like chips of flint. "Your order is unlawful," Thorne stated, his voice devoid of heat, a simple declaration of fact. "It jeopardizes the safety of my firefighters and the public. I will not obey it. Now, for the last time, step aside and let my men do their jobs." The words hung in the superheated air, an irrevocable act of defiance. For Officer Vance, this was the ultimate transgression. It was not just a refusal, it was a public repudiation of his authority. The carefully constructed edifice of his self-importance crumbled, replaced by a raw, blunt fury. The pretense of professional disagreement was gone, vaporized by Thorne's insubordination. "That's it," Vance bit out, the words sharp and venomous. "You're done." His right hand moved with a speed born of constant practice, not toward his firearm, but to the handcuffs clipped to his duty belt. The metallic rasp of the chain was shockingly loud, a sound completely alien to the fireground. It was the sound of a line being crossed, a point of no return. Thorne watched the movement, a profound sense of weary disbelief settling over him. It was actually happening. This kid, this arrogant, misguided child playing cop, was going to arrest him in the middle of a major fire, while he was in command. "Don't be a fool, son," Thorne said, his voice low and steady, a final attempt to inject a shred of sanity into the escalating madness. "Put those away. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Vance snarled, stepping forward, the handcuffs held ready in his hand. "I'm arresting you for felony obstruction of a governmental operation and interfering with a police officer. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." The scene became a bizarre, slow-motion tableau. Captain Miller, who had been directing the repositioning of the master stream, saw the glint of the handcuffs and started running back toward them, his face a mask of horrified confusion. "Hey, what the hell is going on?" Other firefighters paused what they were doing, their heads turning in unison. They stared, slack-jawed, as a police officer advanced on their battalion chief with a pair of handcuffs. On the periphery, news cameras, which had been focused on the fire, swiveled to capture this new, far more compelling drama. They zoomed in, ensuring every detail of this unprecedented confrontation would be broadcast live across the city. Thorne stood his ground. He made no move to comply, nor did he resist. He simply stood there, a bulwark of defiance in his heavy turnout gear. His posture radiated a powerful stillness. "I will not turn around," he said, his voice ringing with the absolute certainty of his conviction. "I am in command of this incident. My crew and the public are in danger. You are the one interfering with your duties. Officer!" That was all the justification Vance needed. He saw Thorne's stillness not as professional resolve, but as passive resistance. He lunged forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm, which was thick and unyielding in its protective bunker coat. "I said, turn around, now." The physical contact was the final catalyst. Thorne instinctively tensed, a lifetime of physical training reacting to the hostile grip, but he did not pull away. He would not give Vance the satisfaction of claiming he had resisted. "Get your hands off me," Thorne commanded, his voice rumbling with controlled fury. Miller arrived beside them, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Officer, for God's sake, calm down. We have a wall coming down. This is insane." Vance ignored him completely. His entire world had narrowed to the act of subduing this one defiant man. With his free hand, he grabbed Thorne's other arm. The disparity in their size and weight made it an awkward, clumsy struggle. Vance was strong, but Thorne was a solid mass of muscle and gear, like trying to wrestle an oak tree. "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, the strain evident in his voice, even though Thorne was doing nothing of the sort. He finally managed to wrench Thorne's right arm behind his back and fumbled with the handcuffs, his movements jerky with adrenaline. The first cuff snapped shut over the bulky sleeve of the turnout gear, not even close to touching skin. He pulled Thorne off balance, spinning him around with a surge of effort, and finally secured the second cuff, linking the chief's hands awkwardly behind his back. The final click of the handcuffs echoed with a shocking finality. It was a sound that severed the last thread of reason on the scene. Marcus Thorne, Battalion Chief of the Oakwood Fire Department, a 25-year veteran decorated for valor, stood in the middle of his own fireground. A prisoner. The absurdity of it was a physical weight, heavier than his air pack, heavier than the burden of command he had carried moments before. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, dozens of them. He saw their shock, their confusion, and the sudden, dangerous paralysis that was gripping them. A fire crew is an extension of its commander. Without him, they were a body without a head. They were leaderless, over Vance's shoulder. Thorne watched the scene he was no longer in control of begin to unravel. The Bravo wall was no longer just bowing, it was shedding bricks like loose teeth. The order he had given to cool its base, the order that had triggered his arrest, had never been fully executed. In the critical moments of Vance's confrontation, Ladder 9's crew had hesitated, their attention diverted by the unbelievable sight of their chief being shackled. That hesitation was all the dragon needed. "My God," Thorne breathed, not in anger, but in sheer, gut-wrenching despair. "He's going to get someone killed." Vance, misinterpreting the comment as a threat, shoved him forward toward the patrol car parked 100 feet away. "You're the one who's going to get someone killed," he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and self-righteousness. "You should have followed my orders." The perp walk was a slow, humiliating journey. Thorne, encumbered by his heavy gear and the awkward angle of the cuffs, was marched away from the battle he was supposed to be leading. He was a general being escorted from the field by a belligerent private. He could hear Captain Miller shouting into his own radio, his voice strained, trying desperately to pick up the shattered pieces of command. "All companies, this is Miller. I'm assuming command. Ladder 9, get that master stream in service, now! Damn it, now!" But it was too late. The delicate symphony of command had been broken. Miller was a good captain, but he was reacting, not commanding. He was trying to steer a ship whose captain had just been thrown overboard. The seamless, almost psychic communication that Thorne had maintained with his crews was gone, replaced by confusion and hesitation. As Vance fumbled to open the rear door of his patrol car, Thorne watched in horror as the inevitable happened. With a deafening roar that sounded like the end of the world, the entire west wall of the warehouse let go. It didn't crumble. It failed catastrophically, collapsing outward in a single, massive piece. A tidal wave of red-hot brick, twisted steel, and flaming debris weighing hundreds of tons crashed down, obliterating the area where Engine 15's handline had been moments before. The collapse zone Thorne had established had held, but just barely. His earlier order to pull his men back had saved their lives. The force of the collapse sent a superheated pressure wave rushing outward, carrying a blizzard of embers. The water curtain that had been protecting the lumber yard faltered as the hose team scrambled for cover. The embers, glowing like malevolent stars, rained down on the adjacent property. They landed on stacks of treated lumber, on pallets of wood shavings, on the building's dry asphalt roof. Within seconds, dozens of small fires began to smolder. Then, with a collective whoosh, a 20-foot stack of kiln-dried pine ignited, turning into a raging inferno. "We've got an exposure fire! The lumberyard is going!" Miller's voice screamed over the radio, a cry of pure anguish. "Second alarm! I need a second alarm on this box! We are losing containment!" From behind the wire mesh of the patrol car's back seat, Thorne slammed his shoulder against the plexiglass, a caged lion watching his pride be slaughtered. "Vance, look!" he yelled, his voice muffled but desperate. "Look what you've done! The fire is spreading! You have to let me go! My men need me!" Vance glanced from the newly erupting inferno back to the man in his car. He saw the disaster, but his mind, locked in its own narrative of righteous enforcement, refused to accept culpability. This wasn't his fault. This was the consequence of Thorne's defiance. He keyed his radio, his voice tight and controlled, a stark contrast to the panic unfolding on the fire frequency. Dispatch. Show one in custody. Transporting to Central Precinct. The scene is active. The word active was a masterful understatement. The scene was no longer a controlled emergency. It was a conflagration. It was a disaster. And Marcus Thorne, the one man with the experience and authority to regain control, was a prisoner, watching his city burn because of one man's catastrophic ego. The 10-minute drive from the chaos of Elm Street to the sterile order of the Oakwood Police Department's Central Precinct was the longest 10 minutes of Marcus Thorne's life. The back of the patrol car was a cramped, suffocating cage. The thick turnout gear, designed for hazardous environments, became an instrument of confinement, bunching up uncomfortably, trapping the heat and the stench of smoke that clung to him. The handcuffs, cinched tight over the sleeves of his coat, bit into the material, pressing the seams into his wrists. Through the metal grate separating the front and back seats, he stared at the rigid back of Officer Vance's head. The young man was a knot of coiled tension, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He drove with jerky, aggressive movements, taking corners too fast, accelerating too hard. He was radiating a kind of triumphant agitation, the high of a man who had won a fight and was refusing to acknowledge the catastrophic cost of his victory. He never once looked in the rearview mirror. He never spoke. Thorne forced himself to control his breathing. He used the techniques he'd taught to hundreds of probationary firefighters. Box breathing, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, in a smoke-filled room with zero visibility. Panic was the killer. Here, in this cage, rage was the enemy. Rage was useless. He needed to think. He needed to be cold. He replayed the entire incident in his mind, analyzing it not as a victim, but as a commander conducting an after-action review. Had he been unclear in his commands to Vance? No. He had stated his authority and the tactical realities with textbook clarity. Had he been unprofessional? No. He had maintained his composure until the moment of physical contact. He had followed protocol. He had followed the law. It was Vance who had operated outside the bounds of procedure, outside the bounds of reason. Vance's actions weren't a misunderstanding. They were a willful, dangerous overreach of authority, motivated by nothing more than a bruised ego. Thorne wasn't just a man who had been falsely arrested. He was a witness to a crime committed by the officer driving the car. The police radio crackled with updates from the fire, each transmission a dagger in Thorne's gut. He heard Miller's strained voice requesting a third alarm. A third alarm. That meant pulling resources from every corner of the city, leaving other neighborhoods vulnerable. He heard the desperate calls for more water pressure as the firefighters, now split between two massive fires, struggled to keep up. He heard a mutual aid request go out to the neighboring county. The disaster was escalating, spiraling out of control, and the genesis of it all sat 5 feet in front of him, driving him to jail. The helplessness was a physical nausea, a feeling so alien to him that it was disorienting. He was a man of action, of command, of control. Now, he was nothing more than cargo. When they pulled into the sally port of the station, the echoing silence of the concrete garage was a jarring contrast to the symphony of chaos he'd just left. The air was cool and still. Vance got out of the car, his movements still sharp and self-important. He opened Thorne's door. "Let's go, Chief," he said, the honorific dripping with sarcasm. He led Thorne inside. The moment they stepped through the door into the main bullpen, a wave of silence washed over the room. Cops looked up from their computers. Civilian clerks froze with phones to their ears. The sight was so incongruous, so fundamentally wrong, that it short-circuited the normal rhythm of the precinct. A police officer, barely out of his 20s, escorting a decorated fire battalion chief, still in full soot-stained turnout gear, his helmet dangling from his belt, his hands cuffed behind his back. The relationship between cops and firefighters in Oakwood was one of familiar friction and deep, abiding respect. They ribbed each other mercilessly over coffee, argued over jurisdiction at minor incidents. But when the tones dropped for a real emergency, they were two sides of the same coin, a brotherhood of service. This was a violation of that sacred pact. This was a family turning on itself. Thorne kept his head held high, his gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to show the humiliation that was churning inside him. He met the eyes of a few older cops he knew, men he'd shared scenes with for 2 decades. He saw the shock and disbelief in their faces. This wasn't right, and they all knew it. The real fire was still burning on Elm Street, but a different, more insidious one had just been lit right here, in the heart of the city's public safety apparatus. The desk sergeant was a man named Fitzpatrick, a 30-year veteran with a weary face and eyes that had seen everything the city had to throw at him. Or so he thought. He looked up over his reading glasses as Vance marched Thorne toward the booking desk, his pen freezing mid-sentence on a report. A long, low moment of silence passed as Fitzpatrick's brain tried to process the impossible image before him. "Vance." The sergeant's voice was a low, gravelly rumble of disbelief. "What in the sweet name of God is this?" "Arrested him for felony obstruction. Sarge," Vance announced, his voice a little too loud, projecting a confidence that was beginning to look like bravado in the sterile light of the station. He nudged Thorne toward the high booking counter. "Refused to follow a lawful order at a fire scene. Interfered with my investigation. Jeopardized public safety." Fitzpatrick slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if the pressure might help him understand. He knew Marcus Thorne. He'd stood beside him at horrific car wrecks, worked with him on building collapses, shared coffee with him at 3 a.m. while waiting for the medical examiner. He knew Thorne as a consummate professional, a man whose calm demeanor was a force of nature in itself. The last man on earth he'd expect to see in handcuffs. He looked from Vance's rigid, self-righteous expression to Thorne's weary, soot-covered face. He looked at the bulky turnout gear, the radio still slung over Thorne's shoulder, the helmet clipped to his belt. "Let me get this straight," Fitzpatrick said, his tone making it clear he was grappling with the very concept. "You arrested the fire incident commander while he was commanding an incident?" "He was destroying my crime scene," Vance insisted, his narrative unwavering. The booking process began, and the theater of the absurd only deepened. A young booking officer, looking deeply uncomfortable, had to help Vance remove Thorne's heavy turnout coat because of the handcuffs. Underneath, Thorne's uniform shirt was soaked with sweat. The officer began cataloging Thorne's possessions, his voice a quiet, apologetic murmur, a thermal imaging camera, a multi-gas meter, a set of forcible entry tools, a folding spanner wrench, a wallet containing his driver's license, pictures of his wife and 2 daughters, and his fire department ID, clearly identifying him as Battalion Chief Marcus Thorne. The items laid out on the counter weren't the tools of a criminal. They were the tools of a rescuer. Each object was a testament to the life Thorne had dedicated to public safety. Any weapons on you, Chief?" the young officer asked, the title slipping out automatically. Thorne just stared at him, his silence more eloquent than any answer. Fitzpatrick picked up the arrest report Vance was filling out, his brow furrowing deeper with every line he read. "Your report says you ordered him to cease all fire suppression activities on the west wall." "That's correct. Sarge, to preserve the integrity of the scene." Fitzpatrick put the report down on the counter and looked at Vance as if seeing him for the first time. "Son, are you aware of State Statute 252.36, Are you aware of the Municipal Code of Ordinances? Chapter 4, Section 8? They explicitly grant the ranking fire officer sole command authority over all operations within the immediate perimeter of a fire. It grants them the authority to deny access to anyone, and that includes law enforcement, if they determine their presence or actions interfere with suppression or pose a safety risk. Vance's confidence finally flickered. A crack appeared in his armor of certainty. "He was obstructing my investigation," he began, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "What you call an investigation, he calls a conflagration," Fitzpatrick countered, his voice flat. "There's a third alarm burning downtown right now. Son, the lumberyard next door is fully involved. Did that happen before or after you put the IC in cuffs?" The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Vance didn't answer. He couldn't. Fitzpatrick turned to Thorne. "Marcus, you need medical attention? Are you injured?" "I'm fine, Fitz," Thorne said, his voice raspy from the smoke. He looked from the arrest report to Vance, then around the quiet bullpen. "But the city of Oakwood is about to be in a world of hurt." It wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. And looking at the evidence laid out on the booking counter, the tools of a hero and the flimsy arrest report of a fool, Sergeant Fitzpatrick knew with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach that the chief was absolutely right. The real damage was just beginning. The moment Officer Vance's voice crackled over the police radio, coolly stating he had the Fire IC in custody, the information didn't just spread through the city's emergency services network, it detonated. In the 911 dispatch center, a cavern of glowing screens and hushed, urgent voices, a stunned silence fell. The police dispatcher looked over at her fire counterpart, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did he just say what I think he said?" The transmission was immediately flagged with a red priority tag and digitally kicked upstairs to every supervisor in the building. At the fire scene, the news hit the command structure like a physical blow. Captain Miller, already overwhelmed trying to manage a rapidly expanding disaster, had to ask his battalion chief, O'Connell, to repeat his transmission. "Chief, say again," Miller had pleaded into his radio. "My radio must be breaking up. I'm en route to the precinct." Battalion Chief O'Connell's voice came back, tight with fury. "PD has arrested Chief Thorne, on scene, for obstruction. You have command until I get this sorted out." Within minutes, the electronic tendrils of the alert reached the highest levels of both departments. Fire Chief Henderson got the call while in a city budget meeting and nearly dropped his phone. The police chief, a political appointee named Rawlings, was interrupted during a press conference about community policing. But most crucially, the news reached the one organization built for a moment precisely like this: the Oakwood Firefighters Union, Local 212. Union President Frank Costello was a retired fire captain, a gruff, silver-haired man with the disposition of a cornered badger. He viewed his union members not as colleagues, but as his family. An attack on one was an attack on all. The arrest of a battalion chief on his own fireground wasn't just an attack. It was a sacrilege. It was a declaration of war. Costello was on his home treadmill when his phone buzzed with the priority text from the dispatch supervisor. He read it, stopped the machine, and felt a cold rage settle over him. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to Fire Chief Henderson, informing him in no uncertain terms that the Union was mobilizing its full legal and political arsenal. "We're going to own this city by the time we're done, Chief," he'd promised. The second call was to a number on his speed dial, one reserved for 5-alarm emergencies of the legal variety. "Alani, it's Frank. I need you. They've crossed a line I didn't even know existed." Alani Davis was the Union's weapon of mass destruction. A partner at the city's most prestigious civil rights law firm, she was a former federal prosecutor who had switched sides. dedicating her formidable intellect to defending labor unions and private citizens against governmental overreach. She was sharp, relentless, and possessed a near-photographic memory for case law. She was a black woman who had shattered every glass ceiling she'd encountered. And she took a special, fierce pride in defending black professionals who were targeted by the system she knew so well. City attorneys feared her. Police departments dreaded her subpoenas. She was, in short, the last person the city of Oakwood ever wanted to see walking into a courtroom representing a firefighter with an impeccable record who had been arrested on live television. "Tell me everything, Frank," she said, her voice calm and cool, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. As Costello laid out the unbelievable details, she was already pulling up the municipal code on her laptop, while Alani was en route. A parallel crisis was unfolding within the police department. Vance's supervisor, a sergeant named Kowalski, had arrived at the fire scene to find a vision of hell. The warehouse was a blackened, collapsing shell. The lumber yard was a raging inferno threatening the next block. A clearly overwhelmed Captain Miller was desperately trying to coordinate a massive mutual aid response from 3 different counties. "Where is Officer Vance?" Kowalski demanded, his face pale with dread. "He arrested our chief and left," Miller screamed back over the roar. "Took him downtown." Kowalski's blood ran cold. He got back in his car and raced to the station. He walked into the bullpen and was met by the sight of Chief Thorne sitting on a bench in the booking area, still filthy, and Sergeant Fitzpatrick looking like he'd just witnessed a public execution. Upstairs, the watch commander, Captain Davis, had already pulled Vance's initial report and his personnel file. Reading the 2 documents together painted a portrait of a ticking time bomb. An officer with a history of aggressive behavior, making a felony arrest based on a self-initiated arson investigation that violated every established protocol for interagency cooperation. Davis knew this was a nuclear device, and Vance had just handed the detonator to the firefighters' union. He called Vance into his office. The young officer walked in, still radiating an aura of self-importance. "Explain this to me from the beginning." "Vance," Davis said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and you better not leave a single damn thing out." As Vance began his self-aggrandizing tale, the phone on Davis's desk rang. It was the front desk. "Captain," the receptionist said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's an attorney here for Chief Thorne. Her name is Alani Davis. She says if he's not released in 5 minutes, she's filing a federal injunction for a civil rights violation." Captain Davis closed his eyes. The bomb had just gone off. Alani Davis moved through the lobby of the police station with the focused, unhurried confidence of a predator. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit, a stark contrast to the chaos and grime of the events that had brought her here. She didn't look angry. She looked energized, as if the sheer audacity of the situation was a challenge she savored. She radiated an aura of such intense competence that the officers in the bullpen instinctively sat up straighter, their conversations dying down as she passed. Sergeant Fitzpatrick met her at the entrance to the secure area. "He's in a conference room." "Counselor," he said, his voice low with a respect he hadn't shown Vance. He led her to a small, glass-walled room where Marcus Thorne was waiting. He had finally been allowed to remove the handcuffs. The sight of him, a decorated chief, a man she knew and respected, covered in the soot of a battle he'd been forcibly removed from, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through her. "Marcus," she said, her voice calm and professional as she set her briefcase on the table and offered a firm handshake. "Frank Costello called me. Let's get you out of here. Tell me everything. From the moment the officer arrived." Thorne recounted the events, his voice a low, tired monotone. He was a commander giving an after-action report, sticking to the facts, the orders given, the responses made. He detailed Vance's escalating demands, his own explanations of the fire dynamics and his legal responsibilities, and the final, unbelievable moment of the arrest. Alani listened, her pen flying across a legal pad. She didn't interrupt, except to ask sharp, clarifying questions. Did he ever identify what specific crime he was investigating, other than a vague mention of arson? No. Did he make any attempt to contact an actual arson investigator from the fire marshal's office before demanding you stop your operations? No. Were there other officers present who witnessed your conversation before the arrest? Captain Miller arrived right at the end. When he finished, she closed her notepad. This isn't just outrageous. It's legally indefensible, she said, her voice firm. His order to cease fire suppression during an active, life-threatening emergency was patently unlawful. An order that is unlawful cannot be legally obeyed. Therefore, your refusal to obey it cannot constitute obstruction. The arrest is invalid on its face. This is a classic case of false arrest and a malicious abuse of process. And given the context, she added, her eyes narrowing, it's also a textbook violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. She stood up. Wait here. This won't take long. She walked out of the conference room and straight to the office of Captain Davis, who was in a heated phone call with a panicked city attorney. Alani didn't knock. She walked in and stood directly in front of his desk, her arms crossed, until he finished his call. Captain Davis, she said, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries. I am Alani Davis. I represent Battalion Chief Marcus Thorne. I have reviewed the preliminary facts, and it is my legal opinion that your officer, Kyler Vance, has committed a Class D felony by unlawfully interfering with an emergency responder. That is in addition to the tort of false arrest and the multiple civil rights violations under color of law. She took a step closer. You are currently holding a decorated fire chief against his will without a shred of valid probable cause, while his department and 3 mutual aid agencies are still downtown trying to prevent a city block from burning to the ground, a situation his arrest directly caused. This is not a legal gray area. This is a 5-alarm fire of your own making. Davis, a man used to being in control, found himself completely on the back foot. Ms. Davis, we are still gathering the facts. The facts are clear, she cut in, her voice like ice. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to release Chief Thorne immediately and unconditionally. The charges will be voided before they are ever filed. His personal effects will be returned to him, and he will be provided with a police escort, driven by a supervisor, not Officer Vance, back to his station or the command post, whichever he prefers. If these things do not happen in the next 3 minutes, I will be on the phone with a federal magistrate to request an emergency writ of habeas corpus. That will be followed by a request for an immediate injunction against the city for unconstitutional policies, and a personal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Vance and you. As his supervising officer, that will make your respective careers evaporate. Am I clear? The captain stared at her. He saw no bluff, no room for negotiation. He was a career cop who knew a losing fight when he saw one. He had spent the last 30 minutes on the phone with a flustered city attorney who had basically told him to cut his losses. Alani Davis was offering him the only off-ramp available before this car crash became a pile-up. He picked up his desk phone, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fitzpatrick, he said. Release Chief Thorne. Uncuff him, return his property, and bring him to my office, now. 30 minutes after Alani Davis had walked into the station, Marcus Thorne walked out. He was a free man, the absurd charges already dissolving into the ether of bureaucratic damage control. His soot-stained turnout gear was in a clear plastic bag in his hand. The setting sun cast long, weary shadows across the parking lot. Frank Costello was waiting for him, leaning against a car, his face a thundercloud. "You okay, Marcus?" Costello asked, his voice gruff with concern. "I'm fine." "Frank," Thorne said, his voice flat. But he wasn't. A line had been crossed that he could never uncross. He had been publicly humiliated in front of his crew. His authority had been undermined, resulting in a catastrophic failure that endangered his firefighters and destroyed more property, all because of the fragile ego and blinding ambition of one police officer. Alani walked up beside them, her phone already pressed to her ear. "We're clear," she said to Thorne, giving him a reassuring nod. Then she turned her attention back to her call. "Yes, I'm getting the update now. Confirmed. The lumberyard is a total loss. The original warehouse is a smoldering ruin. They're still hitting hotspots." "Right. And the initial arson theory? A complete fabrication." She listened for a moment. "I see. So, the fire marshal's preliminary assessment is that Vance's actions, specifically preventing the cooling of the wall, not only failed to preserve a single piece of evidence, but created a collapse that buried the point of origin under tons of debris, making a definitive investigation impossible." "Got it. Thank you." She ended the call and looked at Thorne, her expression grim. In his pathetic attempt to play detective, Officer Vance permanently sabotaged the very investigation he claimed he was protecting. The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Thorne looked back at the police station, a bland brick building that now seemed to represent a fundamentally broken system. "So, what happens now? I just go back to work and pretend this never happened?" "Not a chance in hell," Costello growled. "What happens now?" Alani said, her eyes narrowing with strategic fire. "Is that we make sure this can never, ever happen again. To you, or to any other first responder in this city or this country." The city's legal department, desperate to cauterize the wound, moved with uncharacteristic speed. Their first move was a classic gambit of damage control. Try to make the problem go away quickly and quietly. Less than a week after the incident, Alani received a call from Richard Thorne, the lead counsel for the city, a polished, silver-haired litigator known for making the city's ugliest problems disappear. "Alani, a pleasure as always," he began, his voice smooth and conciliatory. "I've reviewed the file on the unfortunate incident with Chief Thorne, a clear case of two dedicated public servants having a professional disagreement under incredibly stressful circumstances, a terrible misunderstanding." Alani wasn't biting. "A professional disagreement. Richard? One of those public servants ended up in handcuffs for doing his job, while the other's incompetence led to a second multi-million-dollar structure fire. Don't insult my intelligence." Of course," Thorne said, his tone unctuous. "Look, the city values its firefighters. We want to make this right. To avoid the time and expense of protracted litigation, the city is prepared to offer Chief Thorne a settlement. We feel a payment of $100,000 for his trouble, along with a formal written apology from the police department, would be a fair and equitable resolution." Alani was silent for a moment, letting the sheer inadequacy of the offer hang in the air between them. It was nuisance value, go-away money, an offer you make when you think the other side is either scared, greedy for a quick payday, or doesn't understand the strength of their own position. "Richard," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "let me be perfectly clear. We are not interested in trouble money. We are not interested in a token apology that will be forgotten by the next news cycle. We are interested in justice and systemic, institutional change. That offer is not only insulting to a battalion chief who was publicly humiliated and whose life was endangered. It's insulting to every firefighter who pins on a badge. The answer is an unequivocal no." Alani, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, she interrupted. You have an officer who committed a false arrest on live television. You have a department whose training protocols are so deficient they allowed this to happen. You have millions of dollars in property damage directly attributable to that officer's actions. And you have a plaintiff with an impeccable record and the full backing of his national union. You think $100,000 covers that? We are going to trial. Richard, this isn't about a check. This is about changing the law. When she relayed the city's offer to Thorne and Costello at the Union Hall, their reaction was what she expected. Thorne shook his head in disgust. Costello laughed out loud. They're testing us, Alani explained. They want to see if this is about money or principle. This is their opening move in a long game of chess. Thorne leaned forward, his expression resolute. I didn't go through that hell to walk away with hush money. I don't care if it takes 5 years. I don't care if I don't see a dime. I want the policy changed. I want every cop in this city, in this state, to be trained that a fireground commander's word is law, period. Alani smiled. It was the answer she knew she would get. That's what I told them, she said. So, we prepare for war. On a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the fire, Alani Davis filed a 42-page civil complaint in the United States District Court. The case was titled Thorne versus City of Oakwood, et al. The war had officially begun. The filing of the federal lawsuit transformed the incident from a local news story into a national headline. The cell phone footage of Thorne's arrest, shaky but damning, went viral. It was played on a loop on cable news channels, a powerful, visceral symbol of authority gone wrong. The city of Oakwood was in full-blown crisis mode. The mayor's office was inundated with furious calls from citizens and fire departments across the country. The city manager was in emergency meetings with the police and fire chiefs, who were now communicating only through intermediaries. The lawsuit was a multi-pronged assault. Alani had alleged violations of Thorne's Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful seizure, the false arrest, and his 14th Amendment rights to substantive due process. But the heart of the suit was a monal claim, a powerful legal argument that the city itself was liable because the incident was a direct result of its own unconstitutional policies and its deliberate indifference in failing to properly train and supervise its officers. This claim transformed the case from being just about one bad cop into an indictment of the entire police department. The discovery phase began. It was a slow, methodical process of trench warfare fought with paper and digital files. Alani's office unleashed a relentless barrage of subpoenas and requests for production. They demanded every dispatch log, every police and fire radio recording, every training manual, every internal affairs record. They demanded the complete, unredacted personnel file of Officer Kyler Vance. The city's attorneys fought back, filing motions to quash and claiming various legal privileges. But Alani, backed by the union's considerable resources, was a bulldog. She argued every motion before the federal magistrate, and she won every time. Transparency is not a threat to a well-run department. Your Honor, she argued in court, it is a requirement. The documents they slowly pried from the city's grip painted a damning picture of systemic failure. The police department's own policies on interagency cooperation at emergency scenes were vague, contradictory, and hadn't been updated in over a decade. Officer Vance's training records showed he had scored the minimum passing grade on the section covering the incident command system. His personnel file, once unsealed by court order, confirmed the handful of prior citizen complaints for aggressive conduct. Each had been investigated and dismissed, with a boilerplate note about Vance needing to improve his de-escalation skills. He had never been formally disciplined. He had been a problem waiting to happen, and the city had ignored the warning signs. Then came the request for the holy grail of the case, the unedited raw body camera footage from Officer Vance. from the moment he arrived on scene to the moment he logged off at the precinct. The city fought this request harder than any other. They claimed it was part of an ongoing internal investigation and exempt from disclosure. They argued it would have a chilling effect on other officers. Alani's response in court was withering. "Your Honor, the only thing this footage will have a chilling effect on is the city's ability to continue hiding the truth of what happened that day. The public, and my client, have a right to see what that camera saw." The federal magistrate, an imperious former judge with little patience for bureaucratic stonewalling, was not impressed by the city's arguments. He gave them 48 hours to turn over the complete, unadulterated footage to Alani's team. "This is not a negotiation, counselor," he warned the city's attorney. "It is a court order." 2 days later, a digital file arrived via a secure server. Alani, Thorne, and Frank Costello gathered in a conference room at her law firm. The mood was tense. They had seen the news clips. But this would be the raw, unfiltered truth, seen from the perspective of the man who had caused it all. Alani clicked play. The discovery process was no longer about finding a smoking gun. They had just been handed a high-definition video of the shooter, the weapon, and the crime, all recorded by the perpetrator himself. The truth was about to be weaponized. The footage began with the jarring, bouncy perspective of Officer Vance getting out of his patrol car. The audio captured his breathing, heavy with excitement, and a muttered, "Looks like a big one," to himself. The camera's unblinking eye recorded everything from his point of view, a digital ghost on his shoulder. It showed him striding past firefighters, ignoring a captain who tried to give him a situation report. His gaze was fixed on the burning warehouse with an unnerving, predatory intensity. He was a man on a mission, and the mission existed entirely in his own head. Then came the confrontation with Thorne. The camera captured Thorne's calm, professional demeanor, his clear and repeated explanations of the tactical situation. "Son, this is an active fireground. I am the incident commander. My legal responsibility is to protect life and property." The words were clear. Thorne's tone firm, but not aggressive. In stark contrast, the footage exposed Vance's escalating agitation. His voice grew louder, his interruptions more frequent, his posture more confrontational. The camera's sensitive microphone picked up his side of the radio conversation with dispatch, where he grandiosely announced, "Be advised, I am securing a potential felony arson scene, requesting a detective." It was a declaration based on nothing more than his own gut feeling. The most damning portion was the moment of the arrest. The body camera provided an irrefutable, objective record that eviscerated Vance's claims. It showed Thorne standing his ground, his hands at his sides, not moving, not threatening. It then recorded Vance shouting, "Stop resisting!" while the visual evidence showed absolutely no resistance whatsoever. The lens jerked and bounced erratically as Vance, smaller and lighter, struggled to cuff the much larger man, making his actions look less like a controlled arrest and more like an uncoordinated assault. It captured Captain Miller's desperate pleas to stop, which Vance completely ignored. But the final devastating blow was the aftermath. After placing Thorne in the car, Vance walked back toward the fire. The camera was still running, its red light blinking, and it recorded everything. It recorded the catastrophic collapse of the Bravo wall. It recorded the blizzard of embers igniting the lumberyard. It recorded the shouts of panic from the firefighters as the scene spiraled out of control. And it recorded Officer Kyler Vance standing there, doing absolutely nothing. He made no effort to help. He didn't try to assist with traffic or crowd control. He didn't check on the firefighters who had just narrowly escaped being crushed. He was a passive observer, watching the disaster he had precipitated unfold, his face occasionally visible in the reflection of a vehicle window, was a mask of grim, tight-lipped satisfaction. He had won his power struggle. The consequences were irrelevant. He had asserted his authority, and that was all that mattered. When the 28-minute video ended, the conference room was utterly silent. The only sound was the quiet hum of the projector. Frank Costello let out a long, low whistle. "My God," he breathed. He recorded his own crime, start to finish. Marcus Thorne stared at the blank screen, his jaw tight. Watching the event from Vance's perspective was a profoundly unsettling, almost out-of-body experience. He had seen the raw, unfiltered ego that had driven the entire catastrophic chain of events. He saw that for Vance, he hadn't been a person or a fellow public servant. He had been an object, an obstacle to be subdued. Alani Davis was already on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a new motion. A quiet, triumphant smile played on her lips. "This changes everything," she said, her voice electric with a litigator's excitement. "This isn't just evidence anymore. This is the whole case. No jury in the world, no judge, no mediator will watch this and side with the officer. We don't even need witnesses." The body camera, a tool intended to promote police accountability, had become their star witness. It was an objective, unblinking observer that had captured not just the events, but the intent and the shocking lack of humanity behind them. It showed a fire chief performing his duty with textbook professionalism and a police officer abandoning his own duty in a reckless, ego-driven pursuit of authority. Alani attached the video file to an email. The recipient was Richard Thorne, lead counsel for the city of Oakwood. The body of the email contained only 3 words. "Your move, Richard." The digital ghost in the machine had spoken, and its testimony was irrefutable. The deposition of Officer Kyler Vance took place in a sterile beige conference room at a neutral law firm downtown. It was a formal legal proceeding, conducted under oath, with a court reporter transcribing every single word. Vance arrived flanked by Richard Thorne and a nervous-looking police union attorney. He wore his immaculate dress uniform, a calculated choice to project an image of professionalism and authority. He looked confident, almost cocky, but a small muscle twitching in his jaw betrayed the pressure he was under. Marcus Thorne was there, sitting silently beside Alani Davis. His presence was a strategic masterstroke. Alani wanted Vance to be forced to look at the man whose life and career he had upended while he answered her questions under the penalty of perjury. For the first hour, Alani's approach was disarmingly calm. She walked Vance through his background, his training, his commendations. It was a standard, almost boring procedure designed to lull him into a false sense of security, to get him comfortable with the rhythm of her questions. Then, she pivoted. "Officer Vance, when you arrived on scene at the O'Malley textile fire, what was your primary duty as a responding police officer?" she asked, her tone shifting from conversational to forensic. "To secure the scene, maintain a perimeter, and investigate any potential criminal activity," he answered, the words sounding rehearsed. "And what did you observe upon arrival that led you to believe there was criminal activity?" "I observed a structure fire that seemed to be burning with unusual intensity, and the circumstances of its origin, a dumpster fire, were suspicious." "Let's talk about those suspicious circumstances, officer," Alani said, leaning forward slightly. "Your report mentions a theory of arson. Did you have any physical evidence at all to support that theory at that time? An accelerant can? A witness who saw someone set the fire?" "No, it was preliminary information," he admitted. "My training and experience told me the situation was suspicious." "Your training and experience," Alani repeated softly. "Officer Vance, are you a certified arson investigator?" "No." Have you had more than the basic police academy training in fire dynamics and burn patterns? I've attended departmental briefings. So, you have no expert qualifications in this field. Yet you felt your assessment of the fire, based on a gut feeling, superseded that of a 25-year veteran battalion chief who is an expert in that field? Is that a fair characterization? Vance's confident demeanor began to fray. He wasn't listening to me. He was arrogant and dismissive. So this wasn't about evidence, was it, officer? Alani's eyes narrowed. It was about Chief Thorne not showing you what you felt was the proper respect for your authority. He was insubordinate, Vance snapped, his voice rising. Richard Thorne put a calming hand on his arm, but the damage was done. The outburst was on the record. Alani let the word insubordinate hang in the silent room for a moment before continuing. You ordered him to cease all fire suppression activities on the west wall, correct? Yes. To preserve the scene. Were you aware at that moment that the wall was, according to Chief Thorne, in danger of imminent collapse? I'm not a structural engineer. He deflected. No, Alani agreed. But Chief Thorne is a trained incident commander who is qualified to make that assessment, and he told you the structure was failing. Did he not? Vance shifted in his seat. He might have said something to that effect. And you chose to ignore him? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Let's review a piece of evidence, shall we? Alani stood up and walked to a large monitor at the end of the room. She played the body camera footage. The room was silent as they watched the entire confrontation play out. They watched Thorne's calm explanations. They watched Vance yell, "Stop resisting!" at a stationary man. They watched him stand idly by as the wall collapsed and the fire spread to the neighboring lumberyard. When it was over, Alani turned back to Vance. His face was ashen. "Officer Vance," she began, her voice cold and precise. "Your body camera shows Chief Thorne standing perfectly still when you accuse him of resisting. Can you explain that discrepancy to this court reporter? Under oath." Silence. "It shows you watching the fire spread to an adjacent property after you arrested the one man on scene legally responsible for preventing that from happening. Can you explain why you made no effort to assist in any way?" Silence. "Can you explain to me, Officer Harding?" She pressed, her voice like a surgeon's scalpel. "How arresting a fire chief, which directly led to the uncontrolled spread of the fire and the destruction of the lumberyard, helped you preserve evidence for your hypothetical arson investigation?" Vance looked to his lawyers for help, but they could offer none. They stared down at their legal pads, their faces grim. He was trapped by his own words, his own actions, all captured on his own camera. He shouldn't have defied a lawful order," Vance finally stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Alani walked back to the table and sat down. She looked directly at him, her gaze unflinching. "One final question, officer. At any point during this entire incident, from the moment you arrived to the moment you sit here now, did it ever occur to you that Chief Thorne might have been right?" The deposition was over. Vance's justifications, his defense, his entire professional identity had been systematically dismantled under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the truth. His own testimony had confirmed that he was driven not by procedure or evidence, but by a bruised ego and a fatal misunderstanding of his own authority. The transcript would be a monument to his folly, and Alani Davis had just chiseled it in stone. The day after Kyler Vance's deposition, the atmosphere inside the city of Oakwood's legal department shifted from damage control to full-blown panic. Richard Thorne had the transcript on his desk, and it read like a confession. It was a 7-hour record of an officer digging his own professional grave, one defensive, illogical, and self-incriminating answer at a time. The union attorney had called it a Complete meltdown. Thorne knew that if a jury ever heard this testimony or, God forbid, saw the body camera footage in open court, the result would be a financial cataclysm for the city. The optics were indefensible. A calm, professional, black fire chief being arrested by an arrogant, incompetent white cop who then stood by and watched as the situation spiraled into a multi-million-dollar disaster. It was a story that practically wrote its own headlines. He called Alani Davis. The smooth, confident tone was gone, replaced by one of weary pragmatism. "Alani," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "I think it's time we discussed a realistic resolution to this case. The city is prepared to enter into formal mediation." Mediation was the last stop before a full-blown trial. It was a formal settlement conference presided over by a neutral third party, in this case, a respected retired federal judge. It was where both sides laid their cards on the table in a final attempt to avoid the massive cost and public relations nightmare of a jury trial. They met a month later in the stately wood-paneled office of retired Judge Wallace. The city's team came armed with risk assessments and actuarial tables. Alani Davis came armed with the body camera footage on a laptop, the thick binder containing Vance's deposition transcript, and Captain Marcus Thorne, dressed not in a suit, but in his immaculate Class A fire department dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons of service and valor. His presence was a quiet, powerful statement. The morning session was a formal presentation of cases. Thorne argued that it was a case of miscommunication under pressure, a mistake made in good faith by an officer trying to do his job. He emphasized that Vance had no prior formal disciplinary actions, conveniently ignoring the dozen dismissed citizen complaints. He made a new settlement offer. The number had changed dramatically from their initial insulting gambit. "The city is prepared to offer Chief Thorne a settlement of $2 million, he announced. Judge Wallace, a shrewd old jurist with eyes that had seen it all, listened patiently. Then he turned to Alani. She didn't make a counteroffer. She didn't argue legal theory. She simply stood up. "Judge," she said, "before we discuss numbers, I believe it's essential for everyone in this room to have a complete and unfiltered understanding of the facts." She played the body camera footage. She let the unblinking witness tell the story. As the video played, she would occasionally pause it. "Here, Judge," she'd say, pointing to the screen, "is the moment Chief Thorne explains his legal duty as incident commander. And here is the moment Officer Vance ignores him. Here is Chief Thorne making the correct tactical decision to protect his firefighters from a collapsing wall. And here is Officer Vance forbidding it. And here, Judge," she said, her voice dropping, "is the roof collapsing and the fire spreading while the officer who created this chaos stands and watches it happen." When the footage was over, a heavy silence filled the room. She placed the thick binder of Vance's deposition on the table with a heavy thud. "And this," she said, "is 7 hours of Officer Vance confirming under oath that his actions were motivated by ego, not evidence." Judge Wallace called for a lunch break. When they reconvened, he looked at Richard Thorne and the city's team with an expression of profound disappointment. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the federal bench, "I'm going to be blunt. You don't have a case. You have a catastrophe. I have seen the video. I have read excerpts from the deposition. If you let this go to a jury, they will not see a miscommunication. They will see a hero being arrested by a bully. They will see a man who runs into burning buildings being handcuffed by a man whose ego helped create one." He leaned forward. "Your financial liability here is not in the single-digit millions. It is well into the 8 figures. The jury will award Chief Thorne compensatory damages for his false arrest and emotional distress. Then they will award him punitive damages to punish the city and Officer Vance personally. And that number, gentlemen, will be astronomical. You need to understand the position you're in. You need to settle this case today. The negotiations went on for the rest of the afternoon. The city's number crept up. 5 million, 10, 15. Alani Reed and Marcus Thorne never made a counteroffer. They had one condition that was non-negotiable and had nothing to do with money. We want a mandatory, top-to-bottom overhaul of the police department's training and policies regarding interaction with other first responders at emergency scenes, Alani stated. We want it drafted by a joint committee of fire and police command staff, and we want it to be court-enforced as part of this settlement. Without that, there is no deal. Finally, as the sun began to set, the city capitulated completely. The final settlement was historic. The city of Oakwood agreed to pay Battalion Chief Marcus Thorne $24.5 million. It was a number designed not just to compensate a man for his ordeal, but to send a shockwave through every municipality in the country. But for Thorne, the most important part was the second page of the agreement, the one that mandated change. The price of arrogance had been steep, but the victory for principle was absolute. The settlement was the end of the legal battle, but it was only the beginning of the institutional reckoning. A $24. $5 million payout is a figure that no city council can ignore. It's a number that demands accountability. And the first person in the line of fire was Officer Dale Harding. While the civil suit had been proceeding, the Clear Creek Police Department's Internal Affairs Division had been conducting its own parallel investigation. It had been a slow, bureaucratic process, but the conclusion of the lawsuit and the public release of the body camera footage, which Evelyn Reed ensured was part of the settlement agreement, forced their hand. The IIA report was scathing. It found that Officer Harding had violated no fewer than 6 departmental policies: dereliction of duty, abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming of an officer, failure to follow the interagency cooperation protocol, as vague as it was, filing a false report by claiming Gallo had resisted arrest and causing discredit to the department. The report concluded that Harding's actions demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and a fundamental misunderstanding of his role as a peace officer at a complex emergency scene. The recommendation was unequivocal: termination. Police Chief Miller, under immense pressure from the mayor's office and the public, had no choice but to concur. Dale Harding was summoned to headquarters and unceremoniously fired. He was stripped of his badge and his gun. A quiet, ignominious end to a career he had pursued with such misguided ambition. He left the station as a civilian, the authority he had so desperately craved gone in an instant. The system he had tried to weaponize for his own ego had in the end consumed him. But firing one officer was not enough. The settlement demanded more. It demanded change, and so began the difficult, often contentious process of forging a new relationship between the city's fire and police departments. The court-ordered joint committee was formed. It was co-chaired by Fire Chief Henderson and the new police chief, a reform-minded outsider named Isabella Rossetti, who had been brought in to clean up the mess. The committee included command staff from both sides, battalion chiefs, police captains, union presidents, and veteran training officers. Mark Gallo was asked to be a part of it. At first, he refused, wanting only to go back to his job. But Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello convinced him that his presence was essential. He was the living embodiment of why this committee existed. His voice would carry more weight than anyone else's. The meetings were tense. Decades of cultural differences and ingrained tribalism separated the two departments. The cops saw the firefighters as glorified manual laborers who slept half their shifts. The firefighters saw the cops as adrenaline junkies who only knew how to escalate situations. But the shadow of the $22.1 million settlement hung over every discussion. Failure was not an option. Gallo rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. He didn't talk about his arrest or his feelings. He talked about tactics, about safety, about the non-negotiable realities of a fireground. When a structure is burning, the only thing that matters is what the fire is doing and what it's going to do next. He explained in one meeting, "That is a science. It's not a matter of opinion. The incident commander is the only person on scene with the training and real-time information to make life or death decisions. The police role is to support that mission, secure the perimeter, control traffic, handle the public. It's a vital role, but it is a support role. The moment a police officer tries to assume tactical command, the entire operation fractures, and that's when people get hurt. Slowly, painstakingly. They hammered out a new set of protocols. The language was clear and unambiguous. It explicitly affirmed the fire department's incident commander as having supreme authority over all tactical operations within the established hot zone of a fire hazmat incident or complex rescue. It detailed the specific support roles of the police department. And most importantly, it created a new mandatory 40-hour joint training program for all new recruits and a 16-hour refresher course for all veteran officers and firefighters. This new training wasn't just a classroom lecture. It was hands-on, scenario-based training at the city's public safety academy. Cops and firefighters worked together on simulated car crashes, active shooter drills, and, of course, structure fires. They learned each other's terminology, each other's command structures, each other's priorities. They learned to communicate, to cooperate, to trust. The culture began to shift. The firing of Dale Harding was a message. Abuse of authority would not be tolerated. The forging of the new protocols was a promise. This would never happen again. Out of the ashes of a disastrous conflict, a stronger, more integrated system of public safety was being built. It was a painful, expensive, and necessary transformation. Mark Gallo returned to his post at Station 27 3 months after the settlement was finalized. The welcome he received from his crew was quiet, but profound. There were no grand speeches, just firm handshakes, slaps on the back, and the comfortable, unspoken camaraderie of men who had been through a battle together. Slipping back into the familiar rhythm of 24-hour shifts, the blare of the alarm, the routine of checking equipment was a balm to his soul. This was where he belonged. But the world outside the firehouse had changed. The settlement had made him a reluctant public figure. He was no longer just a fire captain. He was a symbol. His name was synonymous with the fight for the rights of first responders. He received letters and emails from firefighters and paramedics across the country, each sharing their own stories of police interference, of being bullied at scenes, of facing discipline for prioritizing patient care or firefighter safety over a police officer's demands. He realized the problem was far more widespread than he had ever imagined. His case was not an anomaly. It was simply the one that had been caught on camera and litigated to a stunning conclusion. After a long conversation with Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello, Gallo made a decision. He took a significant portion of his settlement, $5 million, and used it to establish the First Responders Legal Defense Fund. It was a national nonprofit organization with a simple mission to provide legal resources and financial support to any firefighter, EMT, or paramedic facing legal challenges, retaliation, or disciplinary action for performing their duties correctly at an emergency scene. Evelyn Reed agreed to serve as the fund's chief counsel, assembling a network of pro bono attorneys across the country. Frank Costello, using his national union connections, spread the word. The fund became a beacon of hope for first responders who felt isolated and unprotected. It leveled the playing field, ensuring that a volunteer firefighter in rural Montana had the same access to top-tier legal representation as a union member in a major city. The fund's first case was on behalf of a paramedic in Texas who was being sued by a local sheriff's department for refusing to let deputies take a drunk driving suspect to jail before he could be medically cleared at a hospital. The paramedic had insisted the suspect's head injury from the crash required immediate evaluation. The fund provided an expert medical witness and a top-flight lawyer. The case was dismissed, and the sheriff's department was forced to issue a public apology. The fund had its first victory. Meanwhile, the policy changes in Clear Creek began to ripple outward. The new Joint Operations Protocol, meticulously crafted by the Fire Police Committee, became a model for other municipalities. Fire and police chiefs from other cities, spooked by Clear Creek's massive payout, began calling for copies of the new training curriculum. It became unofficially known as the Gallo Mandate. It wasn't a law, but it carried the weight of a $22.1 million legal precedent. The core tenets were simple: affirm fire command authority on fire grounds, establish clear support roles for law enforcement, and mandate joint training to build cooperation. Cities from Seattle to Miami began adopting variations of the Gallo Mandate, rewriting their own policies to avoid a similar fate. The impact was tangible. A fire chief in Colorado used the Gallo Mandate to successfully push back against a state trooper who tried to order firefighters to move a ladder truck that was protecting a fatal accident scene on the highway. A paramedic crew in Florida cited the principles of the mandate when refusing to allow police to question a critically injured assault victim before they could stabilize him for transport. Mark Gallo never sought the spotlight. He turned down interview requests and speaking invitations. He preferred the anonymity of his helmet and turnout gear. But his legacy was being written not in headlines, but in the fine print of municipal policies and the quiet confidence of first responders across the nation. They knew that if they ever faced a choice between following their training and obeying a dangerous order, they were no longer alone. They had the backing of the Gallo Mandate and the resources of a legal defense fund established by a captain who had faced that choice and refused to back down. He hadn't just won a lawsuit. He had built a shield for his entire profession. Years passed. The scorched patch of earth on that quiet suburban street was now the site of a new house, indistinguishable from its neighbors. The intense drama of that Tuesday afternoon had faded into local memory. But the story of the fire and the arrest that followed did not disappear. Instead, it was codified, institutionalized, and transformed into a permanent teaching tool. The body camera footage of the confrontation between Captain Gallo and Officer Harding became one of the most widely used training videos in public safety. At the Clear Creek Public Safety Academy, every new police recruit and probationary firefighter watched it on their first day of joint training. An instructor would pause the video at critical moments. "Okay, what did the captain just explain to the officer?" the instructor would ask. He explained his legal authority and the immediate hazard. What was the officer's response? The recruits would analyze the breakdown in communication, the failure of one party to listen to the other. They would watch Harding's fatal decision to arrest Gallo. What just happened to the command structure of this fire scene? The instructor would press. It was decapitated. A recruit would answer. What are the consequences of that? The lesson was stark, visual, and unforgettable. The video spread far beyond Clear Creek. It became a required case study in criminal justice programs at universities and in constitutional law classes at law schools. A perfect real-world example of the limits of authority under the Fourth Amendment. Paramedic programs used it to teach students how to assert their duty of care in the face of interference. The case of Gallo versus City of Clear Creek became a legal touchstone cited in subsequent lawsuits and legal opinions. It established a powerful precedent that the authority of an incident commander at a life-threatening emergency was not just a matter of policy, but a matter of established law. The actions of first responders, when based on accepted training and protocols for preserving life, were protected. Mark Gallo eventually retired after 35 years of service. He never became chief, preferring to stay on the line in the captain's seat of Engine 27 until his last shift. His retirement party was a simple affair at the Union Hall, attended by hundreds of firefighters, paramedics, and even some police officers, including the new police chief Rossetti, who had come up through the new system of joint training. In his brief remarks, Gallo didn't mention the lawsuit or the settlement. He talked about his crew, about the privilege of the job, and about the trust the public places in a uniform. "They call us on the worst day of their lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our only job is to make that day a little bit better, a little bit safer. Everything else is just noise." His true legacy wasn't the money or the fame he never wanted. It was in the thousands of emergency scenes that unfolded differently because of what happened that day. It was in the police officer who now instinctively asks the fire captain, "How can we help, Cap?" Instead of issuing orders, it was in the paramedic who confidently tells an officer, "This patient isn't stable enough for an interview, knowing the law is on their side." It was in the fire crew that works seamlessly with police to secure a scene, each respecting the other's role, their joint training having forged a bond of mutual understanding. The legacy was prevention. The battle had been fought once and brutally in front of a burning house in Clear Creek so that countless others would never have to be fought again. One captain's refusal to sacrifice his duty for the sake of compliance had redefined the very nature of authority for generations of first responders, ensuring that the mission to protect and to serve would always come first. The story of Marcus Thorne and Kyler Vance is a stark reminder that true catastrophe often arises not from malice, but from a profound failure of perspective. What drove Officer Vance was likely not a desire to see a city block burn, but a dangerous cocktail of unchecked ambition, professional insecurity, and a cognitive bias known as tunnel vision. In his world, shaped by police procedurals and a desperate need for validation. The most important thing was the theoretical criminal case he was building in his mind. He was so focused on the potential end, a high-profile arson conviction that would earn him his detective shield, that he became utterly blind to the immediate, life-threatening means of the fire itself. His badge, which should have been a symbol of public trust and responsibility, became a shield for his fragile ego. He couldn't fathom a reality where his authority wasn't absolute, where a different uniform carried a superseding duty in that specific context. We can ask ourselves, what if things had been different? What if Chief Thorne, fearing for his career or simply seeking to de-escalate, had complied? What if he had ordered Ladder 9 to kill the master stream and allowed Vance to preserve his evidence? The uncooled wall would have collapsed even more violently. The fire would have spread to the lumber yard with even greater ferocity, and the lives of his firefighters, forced to stand by and watch a preventable disaster unfold, would have been put at even greater risk from the uncontrolled blaze. Compliance would have been the easier path in that moment, but it would have been a path leading to certain disaster and an unforgivable dereliction of his duty. His defiance was not an act of ego. It was an act of profound responsibility. The lesson here transcends the uniforms. It is a lesson about the nature of true authority versus the performance of power. Vance performed power, using his badge and handcuffs as props in a drama of his own making. Thorne exercised authority, an authority born not from a piece of metal, but from competence, experience, and an unwavering commitment to his primary mission of life safety. In any profession, in any life, we will all face moments where we are asked to compromise our core duties for the sake of someone else's ego or agenda. This story teaches that preparation, knowing your job, knowing your rights, and documenting your actions is the armor you wear into that conflict. The body camera that damned Vance could just as easily have exonerated him if his actions had been just and his orders lawful. The objective truth is a powerful ally. This is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most courageous act is to professionally, calmly, and firmly say no. It is about the quiet hero who does their job correctly under unimaginable pressure. Even when the personal cost is immense, it is about the integrity of the mission being more important than the convenience of compliance. What did you take away from Chief Thorne's decision to defy the order? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between doing what was right and doing what you were told? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps support the channel and allows us to continue telling these important stories.